All right, I'm excited today to be able to talk to Rachel Arnold. Rachel is an accountant, and I will let her talk to you about her career path. But she's also, I think, one of our very first FBLA state officers, if not the first. I'm trying to remember now. It's things get away from me. But anyway, Rachel, I'm so glad you're with us today. And if you wouldn't mind just to start out by sharing a little bit about your high school experience, when you graduated, what you were involved with, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Mrs. Hutchins, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your students as well. So I was a 2010 graduate, and you're right, I was one of the first state officers, actually, with Felipe Cortez. He was one of the vice presidents at the time, and I was the state secretary. And then I was also involved in the community service events that we had for our local chapter. Additionally, while I was in high school, I worked at Toys R Us, which was still open at the time, and I helped out with my parents' dental office. Now I work at an accounting firm called BKD. I'm a managing consultant there, and BKD is a national accounting practice with about 2,900 CPAs, advisors, and staff members. We serve all industries, including healthcare, not-for-profit, government, and public sector. Really just a huge variety.
Oh yeah, that is, I think, one of the nice things about starting out, at least in public, because you get to get exposure to different industries, and then a lot of times kind of figure out what your specialty is going to be, what you like, but kind of to backtrack before we get to there. Would you mind to kind of walk us through what your career path looked like from graduation to now? Working in Chicago in accounting as you do?
Yes, absolutely. So after I graduated from Marion, I attended Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Uh, I studied accounting and technology management, and I also got a minor in English because that was something I was always interested in. That was my passion. And I stayed for a master's degree in accounting as well. So I would consider myself pretty unique in the sense that I knew I wanted to go into accounting ever since my class with you, my sophomore year of high school. I knew it was just the right fit for me. You know, there was something very pleasing about the debits equaling the credits, you could say. But then so I knew that the accounting degree would also provide me the most bang for my buck, per se. Because there are so many different career paths you can go down with accounting. And so when I got into accounting, then I decided, well, I want to add on technology because there's a real need there to understand technology. And it was just an uncommon pairing. And then, so while I was in school, I also had a couple internships. My first internship was actually with Marion Toyota, working in their accounting department. And that was just right after my freshman year of college, actually. And then I also had a spring internship where it was audit and tax, and it was with a local accounting firm in Indianapolis, which is where I started out my career. And that was fantastic because I had exposure to both sides that I would consider the most common paths for individuals that come out of an accounting degree. So at that point, I had experience with audit, tax, and what I would consider the business and corporate side of accounting. And I realized that those avenues were not exactly sustainable for me, I would say. I was more interested in something that perhaps like consulting, where I could have some more variety in my work. And so my initial plan was, hey, let's just, plan on going into audit, and let's do that for a few years, and then maybe figure out which consulting path might be right for me. I was very fortunate. Actually had an interview with who was the the woman that was the national industry practice leader for not-for-profit and government at BKD at the time, and she just happened to know that they had an opening in Indianapolis for an entry-level consulting position in internal audit, and what is our enterprise risk solutions practice. So that is how I ended up in enterprise risk solutions at BKD, and I have been doing that now for about 5 years.
Wow. So what would a day be like in enterprise risk solutions? Like, what are some of the things that you might consult with clients about? Obviously, we talk in accounting about how we can't disclose, client information, but just in general, what are some of the things that you would do?
Absolutely. So the role of an internal auditor is to provide independent assurance that an organization's risk management, governance, and internal control processes are operating efficiently. And so as an internal audit consultant, my job is to help my clients identify and evaluate the potential financial, operational, regulatory, and information technology risks that exist in their processes and their information systems, as well as the potential impact if those risks are not mitigated by an action, rule, or mechanism performed by the client or integrated into their technology. So an example of a potential risk might be an error, a misappropriation of assets, or fraud, or an operational efficiency. One way that I like to explain my job is in comparison to a financial auditor, because that's a more commonly known auditor. So the role of a financial auditor is to assess a company's financial statements and the accounting entries impacting those statements. An internal auditor, though, assesses the processes that result in the company's financials. And so while a financial auditor is responsible to understand the internal controls and processes that make up the businesses that they audit, this plays a small component in their overall procedures. As an internal audit practitioner, I take a deeper dive into those processes. I assess the client's procedures against industry best practices, their overall risk environment, so that they can be more successful in meeting their missions and their financial and strategic goals.
So for my students,
Mhm.
when we talk about cash controls, like once a payment is received and how that's processed through the business, or inventory control, like how do we account for inventory coming into the business, and where it's either in the warehouse or on the shelves, and when it leaves the business, controlling, theft, whether it's from customers or employees. So you're looking at the order in which businesses operate to look for those occasions where they could lose money or have damage to property, things like that.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's not going to look the same every day, right? Because it's going to depend on the type of business that you're working with, what their cash flows or inventory systems or whatever's unique to their business might be.
That's exactly right. The favorite part of my job is that every project is different. While there are consistencies across processes and industries, it's actually the uniqueness of the client's concerns and the business operations that keeps my job interesting. And then on top of that, I have an entire firm and their expertise to call upon if my clients have questions that I can't answer. For example, I have colleagues that I work closely with that specialize in forensics and valuation. I have professionals that I work with that specialize in IT and cybersecurity. And so while as an internal audit practitioner, I have a high level knowledge of those controls, I can also call upon people that can help me answer more specific questions for my clients to find them the right solution.
So you have a team that might come in to assess a company's overall network to look at, like how secure it is, or
Exactly.
collecting payments online, how that process works for the customer's benefit, but also for the client's benefit, assessing the risk of cybersecurity or attacks on their system and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Uh, another common procedure that we do is also looking at payment controls. And so when we, as you had mentioned, when you were talking about inventory, for example, we work with procurement to understand what's their process for making sure that they have the right vendors set up, that their vendors are following the best practices, that they're following their contracts.
Mhm.
What are their processes to ensure that they're getting the right pricing, that they're and whatnot,
Yeah.
and also to see if there's a risk that maybe there's a payment going to a vendor that isn't legitimate. And so we do that by speaking to the process and control owners, and then we collect examples, we map the client's controls to a risk framework, and we use data analytics to diagnose potential problems and then test those controls to validate that the controls are operating effectively.
It's a very detailed process. I
Mhm.
didn't ever do what you do, but I did work in auditing quite a bit. And I always liked it because I always said it was like kind of like putting a puzzle together. You know, you had to,
Exactly.
all the pieces fit and if there was anything missing. Um, but I also felt like as an auditor, um, those social skills are so important in the way you approach people. And I'm sure that's true with yours too, because you have to
Mhm.
ask a lot of questions about, well, how does this work? Or what would you do in this situation? Or, walk me through the flow of work. And a lot of times people like put their guard up because they think you're questioning them,
Right.
they're looking for something they've done wrong. And so a big part of my job, I always felt like at the beginning of any audit was to put people at ease, like
Oh,
I'm here to help
definitely.
you. I'm here to learn and kind of always explain what I was doing because if you just
Mhm.
go up and ask a question, they're like, well, why do you need to know that? So would you say that that's true?
Oh, definitely. And on top of that, too, a lot of times with internal audit work, it's happening because the client's asking for it to happen. Whereas with financial audits, they may be forced to have that because a bank says you have to have
True.
it, or the government. Whereas an internal audit, they say, we see a potential risk. We want you to come in with your expertise. And then, even though I'm part of an accounting firm and I'm coming in and looking at it independently, a lot of times I'm acting as one of their team members. I'm acting as one of their employees. And so they feel a lot more open to that. But just as you said, it takes it takes great communication skills to build that relationship, because people are not going to open up and ask for you to tell them what's wrong. You
Yeah.
have to build that rapport.
Yeah. And if you're right. If they're looking at you as it's going to be a benefit, it's going to save our company money, which will lead to greater profits, which will lead to better bonuses for employees.
Mhm.
Then they get on board, they're all.
Exactly. Exactly.
So do you spend a great deal of time traveling or out of the office on site with your clients, or like about what percentage of your time do you spend in the office versus out doing field work?
So I most of my projects, we're in the field whenever we're performing our walkthroughs. We find that to be the easiest method because we have that face-to-face interaction. We're often looking at examples, looking at what's on our clients' screens, but then we typically um, that portion of the project usually only lasts 4 to 5 days,
Mhm.
and then we work remotely. And so we would go into the office, or we may work from another location, such as our home offices. What's been unique, so when I started my career in the Indianapolis office at BKD, it was a much different environment than the Chicago office, because in the Chicago office, we actually have what's called hoteling, which means that we check out which desk we're going to work at that day. And they do that because there's so many people that are not there because they're in the field. And so this is a way for them to reduce how many people are in there. But then it also provides that opportunity for you to sit next to someone new every time you go in. Whereas in my Indianapolis office, I had my cubicle that I sat in for over 4 years.
Uh-huh. That's really neat. I hadn't heard about that, but I mean, that makes sense just to be more efficient with their space too.
Exactly.
Have a certain percentage of your office space sitting empty while people are out, and
Mm-hmm.
real estate is a prime expense in the Chicago
Mm-hmm.
area. So
Exactly.
that makes sense. They're saving on square feet that they use for their office space. That's
Absolutely.
no one told me about that before, so that's something great.
Yeah, it's becoming a much more common way of doing business in accounting. I saw it while I was in college that certain accounting firms that I was going to, they were starting to move to that. And so this is something that in Indianapolis, we were already seeing it with some of the big four, for example, and some of the other regional practices. And I think it's probably something that's going to continue on the rise. But
Really.
then more than that, it does make sense because it, like you said, it's a financial benefit, but then it also provides some variety so that you're renting out the space that you actually need. And
Mhm.
so you can go in, and if you're working with a team, you can rent out a conference room, for example. It may not be appropriate to work in a cubicle where you're going to interrupt everyone.
Mhm. That's great. So do you all do that through a program where you just
Mhm.
go in basically like a calendar or something and reserve your space?
Yes, we go online, and I can see up to 2 weeks ahead of time what spots are reserved. And I go in and I say, I want it for this period of time. And I can say that I want it for the whole day, that I want it for the whole week, that I want it for an hour. And you just reserve that space. And then if something changes, you just go in and you say, I don't need that space anymore. So it
Awesome.
opens it back up.
That's really cool. Well, that's
Mhm.
something else I did not know about. So I feel like we're getting a good picture of what you do. What are some of the skills that you think are most important for someone in your profession to advance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that communication, like we've talked about, is a huge factor because it's not just being able to articulate how you're helping them, but also being able to listen and regurgitate what they're saying and put it in a useful way. Another skill that is uh, necessary to advance is project management.
Okay.
So when you're working at a firm, it's a lot different than working at a salary job in the sense that your the hours that you spend are like inventory because that is your inventory is the hours that you're spending. And so the time that you allocate is much different than what I would imagine that it would be like for a salary employee. But then you're also managing multiple people and multiple projects at the same time. And it's not just multiple projects that you can move around within the same company. It's often multiple clients. So I'll usually work on about 6 different clients at one time. I have some colleagues that I work with that may work on up to 14 projects at a time that are at my same level. It just depends on what they've got going on.
Mhm.
And so being able to manage that and manage expectations with your team members and your clients, that really comes down to that project management piece.
I think that is important for students to know. I have been trying in my junior senior level classes to do more of here is a project that's due, at the end of the week, and
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to manage your time this week? I'm going to give you some benchmarks, like you should have
Mm-hmm.
this done by Tuesday, you should have this done by Thursday, um, to and kind of give them free reign. And I will tell you, it hasn't always worked well because I still have students that are learning how to manage. They just kind of
It's hard.
sit and
Mm-hmm.
look at their computer like, what am I going to do? You know? So that is something that I've got to work better at facilitating to help them get those skills. But it is something that is definitely important in accounting. And I think something else that I haven't talked about with any of my people in accounting yet is when you talk about your time is your inventory is your time, you through the day mark down, right? Like if you work for an hour with one client, you have to document how you spend your 8, 10, 12-hour day so that you are basically keeping a calendar all day of who you've spent your time with. And that is
Mm-hmm.
how they are billed for the services that are provided by your firm. So
Hmm.
being organized and being efficient with your time is pretty important. So right now,
Exactly.
interviewing with me, does that go under like an admin code, like as, this is some of the time that's blocked off to just take care of housekeeping in the office that's not necessarily billed to a client? Is that how that works?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So just like we have billable codes that we have to our clients, we also have non-billable codes. And so these are the items that we consider non-billable, but they're necessary to do our jobs. And so that would be administrative tasks, like you mentioned, timekeeping. That would also be if you have continuing education, learning and development, marketing, those types of items that don't necessarily apply to a specific client, but are necessary to continue doing business and keep up with our licenses and to help out our clients in other ways.
Absolutely. This has been really informative, Rachel. I'm enjoying catching up with you. We haven't talked in person in, I don't know, years. I mean, so this is
Yeah.
fun. But my last question for you is if you wouldn't mind to share just advice that you would have for juniors and seniors in high school, or if you could go back and talk to Rachel when she was a junior or senior, what do you think is important for them to know?
Absolutely. So, my advice would be to prepare to make an investment in your future. So, if you think you might be interested in something, try taking a course on it while you're still in high school or before you start college. Marion is so lucky to have a wide range of introductory courses, not just in business, but also in art, music, and even topics like architecture and welding, and maybe even computer science by now. So, and if that is not enough, John A. Logan and SIU are literally in your backyard, and they offer an excellent array of courses. So try to find something that feels more like a hobby than a job, and then look for a way to make that hobby part of your job. And if you don't know what you want to do with your life by the time you graduate, don't stress out. Uh, it's completely normal, but don't be irresponsible with that investment by wasting your time pursuing something that's not in your best interest. I've been very fortunate because, as I mentioned earlier in the video, earlier in our conversation, that I knew I wanted to go into accounting when I was in high school, but I didn't know that internal audit was going to be that. And I've been so fortunate because I love my job. And I love talking about my job to everyone because it's the coolest thing ever, and I wish I had known about it. But I'm really glad to be where I'm at, and I hope that the students at Marion High School can find something that they love talking about just as much as I love talking about my job.
I think that's so true. And just the opportunities to be exposed to things that you got to take advantage of those. And one of the reasons we're doing these is because I was thinking about what content can I bring to students that they're going to be engaged by during this time. But also I thought, there are all these people that don't have time to physically come in to my
Mhm.
classroom. And even on a normal, like in a normal work day, it would be difficult to kind of carve out. But everybody's kind of on a different pace right now, a little bit.
Yeah.
So we're taking advantage of it. And I'm going to be able to use these videos for hopefully years, to explain, show students. People are like, oh, she's going to keep working for years.
Well, I should hope so. You're a fantastic teacher.
But
Marion needs you to continue working for years.
I'm sure everybody thinks this is all self-promoting, but this is the best thing that I could think of. And if someone has a better idea, they should definitely get it to me. But thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate you taking time with my students today. And it looks like she has her end is frozen. Um, she's working remotely from Southern Illinois right now. And so I totally get it. But thank you, Rachel, for being with us.